All right, and we are back with a brand new episode of the Dreamer Comics podcast. Today we have Filip Sablik, and he is the president of publishing and the president of marketing for Boom Studios. Welcome, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Omar.
I'm really excited to chop it up and talk comics.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I wanted to ask, how did you get started in the comic book industry?
Going farther back than I would care to admit at this point. I really, since I was like a teenager, I had wanted to be in comics. I'm one of those folks that discovered comic books in middle school. A buddy of mine, who's still one of my closest friends, handed me a comic book in 6th grade and like blew my mind. I had always been like a voracious reader, but then through middle school and high school, what I had aspired to do was be a comic book illustrator. And so I ended up going to art school.
Oh, wow.
At the Maryland Institute College of Art, and I was an illustration major. At the time, right now, Micah has actually a really terrific comic book track in their illustration department. There's like some really phenomenal professors there, including Jose Villarrubia, who's a really renowned colorist in the industry. And Jose was there when I was there, but at the time, there was still kind of this feeling like comic books weren't art, you know?
Yeah.
And so my background in terms of my education was much more illustration focused, like traditional editorial illustration and stuff like that. While I was there, I was learning all that stuff. I was putting together portfolio packages. I was that kid like in high school that was putting out a sample packet every month. You know,
were you going to conventions, showing it to people?
Yeah, as much as I could. I grew up in Virginia, in Southwest Virginia, which was there weren't a ton of comic conventions. The biggest convention in the area, and the one that like I went to in high school, that I thought was like, oh my god, it doesn't get bigger than this, was Heroes Con, which was obviously a terrific show, but you know, really a mid-sized.
Yeah, that's not a
show.
That's not a AA show or anything like that.
Right. And so I was doing all that, and then I got to my senior year of college, and I remember sitting in my senior critique, and probably my illustration class in the critique was like 20, 25 people. And I remember kind of looking around and going like, I'm better than those 10 people. I'm nowhere as good as those 5 people. Ah, crap, I'm in the middle. This is not a good place to be, you know? Like,
yeah, and absolutely. You want to be at the top. You want to be that person who's going to say, wow, I'm the best.
Right. But and I had enough self-awareness to go like, that's not me. And I kind of looked at my options, and one option was kind of take the leap and like move up to New York, where, you know, at the time that was the center of comic book publishing.
Yep.
Kind of take my portfolio around and live on like bologna and you know, peanut butter jelly sandwiches for the next few years and really try to make a go of it, or try to go a different path. And at the time, I was about to get married, and I thought, well, I should probably be a little bit more responsible than just like moving up to New York. And so I started. This is also relatively early in like the age of the internet, where like you could actually go online and like research stuff, right? And so I happened to come across the Diamond Comics website, saw they were looking for customer service reps. It was probably the only job I was qualified to do because I had waited tables, because my BFA was not really good for much else. And so I thought, well, okay, this is in
the comic book industry.
In the comic book industry, it's a full-time job. It probably has health insurance, and
I can support my family this way.
I can support my family this way, and it'll be a way to get my foot in the door. And at the time, I thought, well, I'll do this. I'll have an opportunity to network, because I was relatively confident in my ability to like talk to people,
of course,
like, be friendly and like develop relationships. And so I thought, if I can do that, then maybe I can segue into being a penciler or an illustrator at some point.
And so how did you end up finding out about the diamond position? Like, how did you end up?
Well, the reason I ended up on their website was because in college I had started up a comic book club.
Oh, wow.
It was the first like comic book and graphic novel club at Micah. And one of the things we did was we worked together to like order books. And so I had done some research and found a mail order site and I want to say it was Mail Order Comics. I don't think Discount Comic Book Service was around at that point yet. And one of the things they did was they sent you a previews catalog, and that's how you ordered. And so it was my first exposure to like, oh, there's a catalog in this industry where you can pre-order comics from. And so that's, I think, how I
kind of found out about Diamond.
Yeah, and then started. And so as I was looking for jobs in comics, I did like a internet search. I don't remember whether it was a Google search. It was probably something like Alta Vista. Or something like that. Anyway,
Ask Jeeves back then.
Yeah. and just kind of came across it, and then I applied for it. I got called in for an interview, and I graduated May of 2000, and I started at Diamond June.
Wow.
2000.
That's
and so I've pretty much been in comics straight out of college.
And so when you got there, like, were they just like, okay, your job is going to be working with indie publishers to get the books into previews, or what was?
Oh no, it was not even that glamorous. It was literally customer service for the retail accounts.
Oh wow!
So I worked from 11 to 7.
Okay, dealing with all the different comic book stores and
West Coast actually. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so my accounts were Washington State. So I had Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
I had Montana. In 2000, there were 6 comic book shops in Montana.
Wow.
Just so you know, that was it. And they were all in like Missoula and Billings. That was it. And then I had some California stores as well. And what was really great about that, I was in that job for a year. And it really is like a Comics 101 crash course. Like working at the distributor, you got to see how all the facets of the business side of the industry work.
Absolutely.
What's the supply chain? How do these different pieces work together? And I had firsthand exposure to what retailers' concerns were, and like what were the things that motivated them.
Of course.
What were the things that stressed them out in a given week. And what was neat about the way that Diamond worked, I think at this point, most of the like ordering and reordering is done through their website. Everything's done on the internet.
Yep.
But back then it was like
all by hand.
40, 50 of us sitting in the basement at the Diamond offices.
Wow.
Just rolling calls. And so you would have your accounts that you had relationships with, but when you weren't engaged with one of them, you were in the queue, and you would literally just take calls from retailers all over the country. And so like that was another thing that was really educational, was just like, how do you interact with people from different parts of the country, right? Like the retailer who's in New York City or Boston interacts with you in a much different way than the guy who's in Iowa.
Of course.
And
there's a different level of customers. There's a different level of demand, supply,
and intensity, and just the way that and so being able to kind of like adapt how you talk to people and respond to that was really helpful. And I was there when Bill Jemas and Joe Quesada were relaunching
Marvel Knights and
selling in Ultimate Spider-Man for the first time, and when Wildstorm was really kind of having its renaissance over at DC. And so it was a cool time to be there, because it was like there were people that I was working with that had been there during the crash.
Yeah.
And were still kind of like, recovering from the effects of that. But we were doing things, there was email, but it was a lot of phone calls, fax orders.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I don't even think like wireless was around back then. I feel like it was still hard. I mean, 2000 was it was close.
I think I had my first cell phone in like 2001.
Yeah.
And again, just because I hadn't let go of this idea of being an illustrator. I remember I got that cell phone specifically because I thought, well, I'm sending out these like samples.
Yeah.
And I want to put a number on it. And if somebody calls me with like a job offer, I want to be able to get it.
Of course.
Right away, right? Yeah, so I was in that job in customer service for a year, and then a position opened up in purchasing, which is Diamond's department that deals with the publishers, and that was the more glamorous
side of the business.
Right? Like
because you're not worrying about damaged orders, or you're not worried about right. My count was off this week, and how do we fix that? And because I've owned a comic book store as well.
Oh really?
Yeah, I had Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica.
Oh man, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, that's a great store.
I love that store, and they just moved right now, and they're they're incredible. They've kind of the new owners right now have kind of brought new life into the business.
But so you know the concerns.
I know.
Like,
Absolutely.
And again, like the varying degrees of it, right? Like you could be talking to, somebody from Midtown Comics that is just trying to get in there, reorder as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. We have demand for it. This is a hotter book than we thought it was.
Right. Or just like, for them, they're used to shortages and damages, and they're going through and they're just like, this is just like, I got to get my work done so I can move on to the next thing. And then in the next minute, you'd be talking to a store that just opened up in the last year, and they're in Billings, Montana, and like the one copy of Ultimate Spider-Man you didn't send them really like
ruin their business. Yeah.